I think the ones that I would say are probably the most promising are probably, I would say, the CSF biomarkers. In CAA, we've been lucky because we often borrow technology from our colleagues who work in Alzheimer's disease because it's the same amyloid-β protein that you get in both conditions. And so, especially with the CSF, people with Alzheimer's disease have a reduction in amyloid-β 42, and we've known about that for a really long time. What we see in CAA is that you get reductions in amyloid-β 42 and also amyloid-β 40, and that is a finding that has been replicated by different centres and remained faithful in a meta-analysis that was published a few years ago. So I think that's a really promising set of biomarkers. Other things that we might want to think about. So work from our own group has shown that it's not just amyloid-β 40 and 42, but other parts of the amyloid-β processing pathway can be reduced in people with CAA. I think that's quite interesting potentially from a mechanistic point of view. And there are also important negatives. So we know, again, that certain markers are more apparent in other diseases of neurodegeneration. So things like total tau and phospho-tau, and the fact that we might not necessarily see changes in people with CAA might make that a useful negative test. I also mentioned in my talk some of the data from our group where we looked at CSF ferritin and iron, which again seems to be up in CAA. So from the CSF side of things, it might be great in the future if we had a sort of a panel where you have amyloid-β measures, you have measures that are associated with neurodegeneration, which might not be abnormal in CAA, and then some other markers, for example, ferritin or iron, and you use a combination of those different measures to get a sort of signature for CAA. That's kind of, perhaps the way that things will evolve. When it comes to PET, again, we've borrowed technology from our colleagues who work in Alzheimer's disease, and amyloid-β PET is probably the most frequently investigated in CAA. So that's using 11 carbon compounds and also 18 fluorine compounds. I think it's fair to say that when it comes to diagnosis, our MRI criteria are probably too good. And so the amyloid PET studies to date haven't been as good, I would say, for diagnosis. And that's borne out in a meta-analysis that was published a few years ago. But people are trying different things to try and improve that diagnostic accuracy, looking at aspects of CAA from a pathological perspective that might help. So looking, for example, at the posterior PET signal versus the global signal as a way to make amyloid-β PET more specific for CAA. The other way of potentially using amyloid-β tracers is to look at the early uptake, to use it as a measure of perfusion rather than a measure of amyloid burden, and that also seems to be quite promising. So definitely areas to watch. And of course, there are newer PET tracers, for example, those FTG PET and tau PET, where we really don't have a huge amount of data, but might be really exciting in the future.